I can still remember that feeling. It wasn't some loud, dramatic realization. It wasn't like the ground was shaking beneath me or the world came crashing down. No, it was more subtle, a quiet, creeping discomfort. A soft whisper in the back of my mind that something was wrong. Rachel and I had built this company together from scratch. Late nights, early mornings, endless hours spent chasing a dream we both swore we believed in. She wasn't just my business partner. She was my everything, my equal. For years, I never questioned that we were in this together. But lately, something had shifted. She was still the same sharp, brilliant person in meetings. Numbers? She could still make them dance. But there was a difference. Her mind wasn't entirely here anymore. She was elsewhere. And when we finally secured the big contract, the one we'd worked so hard for, I expected us to share that victory. But instead, as we sat down for dinner to celebrate, I watched her closely. I noticed not just what she was saying, but what she wasn't. She wasn't celebrating, not really. She wasn't taking in the moment. I was soaking in the weight of what we'd achieved, and she was already looking ahead, talking about growth, talking about new clients, about global markets, about what came next. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about our dream anymore. It was about hers. She kept saying things like, "We're almost there, Joseph. Just imagine. Soon we'll be at the top, surrounded by the real players." Her voice had changed. There was something in it I hadn't heard before, something unfamiliar, distant. And then we met Yvonne Mers. He was exactly what you'd expect, a self-assured millionaire with that smug, I've seen it all grin, the kind of guy who wears his wealth like an aftershave. I thought at first he was just another investor, someone to help us push forward. But the moment Rachel shook his hand, I could see it. She saw him differently. To her, he wasn't just money. He was a lifestyle. And, damn it, she hadn't fallen for him right away. Yvonne started talking about his travels, the places he'd been, the circles he ran in. I thought it was just rich guy bragging, but Rachel was hanging on every word. I caught her laughing at something he said. Her eyes practically locked onto his, and I saw a smile on her face. A forced, strained smile I hadn't seen in ages. She had this little habit of tossing her hair when she was intrigued. She'd done it with me when we first started dating, but now, it was all for Yvonne. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just professional respect. After all, we were aiming for growth, right? But as the days passed, it wasn't just Yvonne. Rachel started pulling away from me in ways that stung, little, subtle things that felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. She was staying late, saying she was meeting with investors or working on strategies. There was a mess of trade issues to deal with. Some foolish person had started a trade war with countries we'd had great relationships with for years. Partners were backing out of deals, even old ones, citing delays and duties that no longer made sense. One of our major sectors, the one that handled baked goods and cakes, was teetering on the brink of collapse. Prices were skyrocketing. The price of eggs increased by more than $10, making our products too expensive and less competitive. Samantha Rithing was falling apart, but Rachel seemed more distant than ever. I tried to talk to her about it, to figure out where we stood, but every time I mentioned Yvonne and whether he could help, she brushed it off, claiming it was just a professional matter. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, like she was bracing for an accusation I hadn't even made. I noticed it in the office, too. Gloria, my assistant, who'd been with us since the beginning, started noticing how often Rachel had private meetings. Meetings that weren't on the schedule, meetings that seemed to happen out of nowhere. Gloria's smart. She's always been able to read between the lines, even when she doesn't say anything. One day, she casually asked if I knew why Rachel had so many off-the-record meetings. She wasn't pushing for answers, but I could tell she was hinting at something. And me? I wasn't ready to go there yet. But then things got worse at home. Rachel started coming home late, smelling of a perfume I'd never seen her wear. Expensive stuff, not her usual brands. She'd mumble something about high-profile clients, about looking the part. But I was starting to feel like she wasn't dressing up for her business meetings. She was dressing up for someone else. Our conversations got shorter, our moments colder. She'd rush past me, always with some excuse. Always too busy to stay, too busy to talk. Whenever I asked what was going on, she'd say, "This business doesn't run on autopilot, Joseph." And I'd almost feel guilty for even asking, like I was the one being needy. Finally, I took it to Justin that he'd been my friend for years, before Rachel entered the picture. He listened quietly, as he always did, letting me get everything off my chest. Then, finally, he gave me that look, the kind that told me he was serious. "Look, Joseph," he said, "I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong, but just pay attention. People can get carried away with success. Just don't let your guard down." He didn't need to say more. I understood. We both understood. Still, I had to admit, he had a point. Maybe Rachel was just caught up in everything. The excitement, the momentum. Maybe she wasn't doing anything wrong. But even after that conversation, I couldn't shake that gnawing feeling inside me. It was like an itch that wouldn't go away. Samantha, time she left the house, every time she scheduled another meeting, it seemed to intensify. I started noticing small things, tiny shifts in her behavior. Like the way she'd glance at her phone more often, or linger over certain names in conversation, especially Yvonne's. She didn't seem like the Rachel I knew anymore. She was becoming a stranger in our own house, and I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if something had really changed. There I was, caught in this weird middle ground. A part of me wanted to confront her, to grab her phone, to dig through her messages and demand some answers. But another part, the part that had spent years building this life with her, kept whispering in my ear to wait, to observe, to play it smart. I wasn't ready to act yet, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And once that suspicion creeps in, it's impossible to ignore. It was like someone had turned up the volume on everything Rachel did that felt off. She started dressing up more, too much, honestly. Rachel had always been beautiful, and I'd always loved how she took care of herself. But now, she was buying expensive clothes, new perfumes, things I'd never seen her wear before. When I asked about it, she'd brush me off, saying something like, "High-profile clients expect a certain look, Joseph." The way she said it, it sounded like I was the one who didn't get it. She was staying late at work more often, too. Said she was swamped with evening meetings, caught up in reports and new client presentations. But it wasn't just now and then, it was every night. And the excuses were starting to wear thin. Sometimes she'd be home by 11 p.m., sometimes after midnight. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But this nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Part of me hated that I was even thinking these things about her. But how could I ignore it? Especially with the way her wardrobe was changing, with the way that perfume always seemed to linger in the air every time she left the house. Then, one day, Gloria, my assistant, mentioned that Rachel had left her work laptop open. Gloria didn't push it. She just dropped the hint, like it was no big deal. But it hit me like a bomb. I wrestled with myself for a while, debating whether I was crossing a line. But in the end, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the laptop. What I found were emails between Rachel and Yvonne. They weren't overtly scandalous, nothing that would scream betrayal, but there were strange little things in them. Phrases that didn't sit right. There were mentions of meetings outside of business hours, vague references to the usual spot, and little details that made my blood run cold. It wasn't enough to directly confront her, but it was enough to fuel my growing suspicion. A few days later, I couldn't take it anymore that I had to see it for myself. Maybe I was just imagining things, but I knew she had a meeting near one of our regular lunch spots, so I decided to swing by, pretending it was by chance. And sure enough, there they were, Rachel and Yvonne, sitting in the far corner, looking far too comfortable. They were laughing, leaning in close, their chemistry undeniable. I noticed that familiar flick of her hair, that little move she used to make when she was interested, when she wanted attention. And then, Rachel spotted me. Her face went through a mix of emotions, shock, guilt, and finally, irritation. She waved me over, forcing a smile as she introduced me to Yvonne, who, of course, had that annoyingly calm expression. "Hey, Joseph," she said, slipping into that practiced, professional tone. Yvonne and I were just going over some client strategies. She stressed client strategies like it was something I'd somehow misunderstood. I played along, shook Yvonne's hand, and tried to act casual, but inside, I was seething. There was no reason for her to be so cozy with him. There was no business reason for her to laugh that hard at his dumb jokes. I wanted to confront her right there, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more than just a gut feeling and an uncomfortable lunch meeting. After that, I knew I had to dig deeper. Rachel had this close friend, Samantha, someone she trusted with everything. I figured Samantha would know if something was going on or, at the very least, if Rachel had been saying anything strange. So I reached out casually, pretending I was just checking in. I asked around, hinting if Rachel had seemed different lately. Samantha hesitated for a moment. Well, Joseph, she said, choosing her words carefully. Rachel's been talking about wanting more out of life. She feels like she's missing out on something, like she needs to live a real life, whatever that means. She paused, her voice lowering, then added, she's been talking a lot about the people she's been meeting lately, especially someone like Yvonne. She says he really understands her ambitions. That was all I needed to hear. Samantha didn't have to spell it out. It was clear now, Rachel wasn't just seeing Yvonne as a business contact. She was seeing him as something more. I thanked Samantha, trying to stay composed. I had suspected something, but now I had confirmation from the way Rachel was speaking to her friends. She was looking for a life I wasn't a part of, a life that, apparently, Yvonne was all too eager to give her. That night, Rachel came home late again. She was visibly tense, clearly irritated about something. She slammed her bag on the counter, then took off her shoes with more force than necessary. I could feel the storm coming. She was itching for a fight. Sure enough, she didn't waste any time. Do you even care about my career, Joseph? She snapped, barely glancing at me. I feel like you don't get what I need to do to succeed. You just want to stay comfortable, but I need more. More. I repeated, barely holding myself together. What exactly do you need, Rachel? More meetings with Yvonne? More late nights? She rolled her eyes, exasperated, like I was some clueless child. Oh, don't start with that, she said. It's just business. Not everything is about you, Joseph. You think I'm doing all this for fun? I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, but instead, I kept my voice as steady as I could. Are you sure it's all just business? Because it doesn't look that way, Rachel. You're out late every night, spending a fortune on clothes and perfume you didn't care about before. If it's not about you, then what is it about? I asked, barely holding back the frustration. She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter, humorless. Unbelievable. You really think I'm that shallow, she said, shaking her head. I'm doing this for us, Joseph. For our future. Maybe if you actually supported me instead of throwing around baseless accusations, you'd understand that. Her words were like daggers, and before long, our argument escalated. Words flew back and forth, each one more hurtful than the last, until she stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone, seething. I could feel it now, the wall between us. The one that had been slowly building for weeks, maybe even months. And after that night, I knew I couldn't trust her words anymore. She'd said everything she needed to say through her actions. Her dismissive tone. Her complete unwillingness to even acknowledge that I might have a reason to worry. As I sat there, I felt like a fool. The guy who had built a life and a business with his wife, thinking we were partners in everything, life and work. But now, I could barely recognize her. As much as I wanted to believe it was just her getting caught up in the excitement of our success, deep down, I knew better. This wasn't about business. It was about her, about a need she had that went far beyond anything we'd built together. I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. But I also wasn't going to sit by and watch her tear apart everything we had. I don't know what made her leave her phone on the kitchen counter that night. Maybe she was getting careless, or maybe she just thought I was too naive, too trusting to check it. But there it was, buzzing away on the counter with that familiar tone, the one I'd heard 1,000 times before. But this time, something inside me snapped. I needed to know. I grabbed her phone, glancing at the screen. It was from Yvonne. The message was short but clear, something about how he'd enjoyed their last meeting at the hotel and how he was already looking forward to the next one. My hand went cold. This was it. The confirmation of everything I had been fearing but hoping wasn't true. She'd left the phone unlocked, and I scrolled back through their messages, finding more than I wanted to see. There were mentions of catching up, hints at private dinners, and words I hadn't heard from her in a long time. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. She'd find a way to explain it away, say it was just networking, or some nonsense about important client relations. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. And I knew exactly who to turn to. The next day, I pulled Gloria aside. She'd been my assistant since the very beginning, and if there was anyone I could trust, it was her. I laid it all out. The late nights, the lunches with Yvonne, the message I'd found. She wasn't surprised. She'd noticed the shift in Rachel's behavior too. Gloria offered to keep an eye on things, to monitor Rachel's work activities, and to check her email whenever she could. She even mentioned that Rachel had been receiving tickets to expensive events, ones I'd never heard of. With Gloria's help, I started piecing together a clearer picture. Rachel was careful, but she wasn't as slick as she thought. Her private meetings were becoming a regular thing, and the tickets she was getting? They were for high-end events I'd never even heard of, events that Yvonne was attending as well. It was starting to feel like a sick game, and I was just watching from the sidelines, while she flaunted this life that had nothing to do with us, with our goals, with the future we'd built. But it still wasn't enough. I needed hard evidence. Something undeniable. Something that would give me the leverage I needed to put an end to this whole charade. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, a guy Justin had mentioned once. He didn't ask too many questions, just nodded and took the information I gave him. Over the next few weeks, he trailed Rachel. He tracked her to high-end restaurants, private parties, and, sure enough, hotel after hotel. Samantha Re-time, Yvonne was there, laughing, leaning in, playing his part. When the photos came back, my stomach twisted. There she was, looking happier than I'd seen her in years, wrapped up in a man who wasn't me. They weren't even trying to hide it. In some of the photos, they were holding hands, leaning close, sharing looks that I hadn't seen on her face in far too long. Finally, I had enough. I wasn't going to sit back and watch her continue this double life while playing the part of the devoted wife. So, that night, when she walked through the door, I knew it was time. I told her we needed to talk. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing just a bit, as if trying to gauge if I knew anything. "What's this about, Joseph?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "I know about you and Yvonne," I said, keeping my voice flat, calm, but unwavering. I wasn't giving her any space to talk her way out of this. "I know about the hotels, the meetings, the messages. I've seen the photos, Rachel. Don't even try lying." Her face drained of color before flushing with anger. She opened her mouth to deny it, but something in my expression must have told her there was no point. She exhaled sharply, crossed her arms, and met my gaze with defiance. "And so what if I did?" she said coolly. "Can you really blame me? I've been stuck in this small, predictable life for years, Joseph. You think a few business contracts and a cozy office are all I wanted?" Her words hit me like a gut punch, but I kept my composure. "I thought we built something together, Rachel. I thought this was about us. It's not about your little fantasy life." She scoffed bitterly, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about money. It's about a lifestyle, being with people who understand ambition. Yvonne gets that. He's everything you're not. Connected, influential, able to offer a life beyond this small-time setup." Hearing her justify it all, especially with such disdain for everything we'd built, for everything I thought we shared, set something off in me. I'd worked myself to the bone for this business, poured my life into it, and now she was acting like it meant nothing? Anger began to harden inside me, turning into something cold and calculated. I wasn't going to let her just walk away without consequences. After she finished her tirade, she stormed out, leaving me there, alone, the full weight of her betrayal settling in. I was done playing nice. If this was the life she wanted, if she was so eager to turn her back on everything we had built, then fine, she could have it. But it was going to cost her. The next day, I went straight to Justin. I laid everything out, her affair with Yvonne, the contempt she'd shown for everything we'd created, and my plan to make sure she didn't just walk away scot-free. Justin was all in. He'd never liked Yvonne, and he was more than happy to help me tear down whatever future Rachel thought she had. We spent hours talking, strategizing. We met with a lawyer who knew the system well, someone who could help me navigate the legal maze. Step by step, we began crafting a plan, one that would legally bind Rachel's assets, cutting her out of the company, from our finances, from everything she thought she had a claim to. I could feel the anger fueling me, giving me a strange kind of energy. It was like a fire that kept burning, pushing me forward. Now, I had the evidence. I had the allies. And soon, I'd have a plan that would make sure Rachel regretted every moment she spent with Yvonne. There was no turning back now. I was ready to watch her world crumble, piece by piece, just like she'd done to mine. When Justin introduced me to William Carey, I knew I was about to enter a new phase, one where Rachel wouldn't be able to manipulate her way out. William was exactly what I needed, a lawyer who knew how to play the game without blinking. He could protect me from every angle Rachel might try to exploit. We sat in his office, and as I explained the situation, William listened carefully, nodding along. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. "Well, Joseph," he said, "if you want to go after everything she's trying to steal, we can make this airtight. I'll make sure she can't touch a cent of the company. And as for the divorce, she'll walk away with as little as possible. But this has to be done carefully." And so, we got to work. Following William's advice, I began moving assets around, shifting funds into separate accounts that Rachel couldn't touch. We set up a series of shell companies, each account layered with legal protection so strong that Rachel wouldn't even be able to crack it without my permission. I felt like I was building a fortress, and with every transfer, I was creating another layer of separation between me and the damage she could cause. One of the most crucial moves was putting part of the company under my sister Millie's name. Millie had her own career, far outside this industry, and didn't owe Rachel any loyalty. She was outraged when I told her the whole story, and without hesitation, she agreed to help. By giving her partial ownership of the company, I was making sure Rachel couldn't touch it. Rachel, if she tried to take me to court, she wouldn't be able to get her hands on it. The company would be beyond her reach. Meanwhile, something else was brewing. My relationship with Samantha. Samantha had been friends with Rachel for years, but she wasn't blind. She saw what was happening, and not a shred of sympathy was left for her so-called friend. Samantha had always felt overshadowed by Rachel, but now, with Rachel's bridges burned, Samantha was more than willing to help. She was invaluable, providing me with insights I'd never have gotten on my own. She knew the real Rachel, the person behind the facade. And with each piece of information she shared, I saw the full depth of Rachel's betrayal. As our plan unfolded, Samantha and I began spending more time together. It wasn't something we planned, but it felt inevitable. Like we'd been drawn together by everything Rachel had done. Samantha wanted justice, and so did I. But with her, it was about more than that. She was loyal in a way that Rachel had never been. And as the lines between ally and something more began to blur, I realized just how much I valued having her by my side. Honestly, seeing Rachel's closest friend stand with me, ready to expose her for everything she'd done, was a kind of revenge in itself. The next big step was dealing with the investors. Together with Justin and Samantha, I set up a meeting with the most influential backers of our company. They were loyal to us, but they had noticed the unsettling changes in Rachel's behavior and her relationship with Yvonne. We called them in, acting like it was just a routine quarterly check-in, a simple update on the company's direction. But when they walked in, I laid everything out. I presented the evidence, the documents, the extravagant expenses, the tickets to events neither Justin nor I had approved. The investors sat there, stunned. I could feel the weight of their shock as I walked them through every cent Rachel and Yvonne had drained from the company for their own private indulgences. The disgust on their faces was palpable as they realized the extent of Rachel's betrayal. By the end of that meeting, any loyalty they had left for her evaporated. They threw their full support behind me, signing off on measures that ensured I maintained control of the company. Any future decisions made by Rachel and Yvonne would no longer impact the direction of our business. With the company secured, my focus shifted to Yvonne. Yvonne had his fingers in many pies, always looking for the next big deal, trying to present himself as a major player, someone everyone wanted to work with. But after what he'd done, I was more than ready to see his carefully crafted reputation unravel. I started reaching out to his business partners, subtly slipping them information about his questionable behavior, how he'd misused funds and manipulated resources for his personal gain. The fallout was swift. Company after company began pulling out of deals with Yvonne, distancing themselves from him. Word spread fast that he was a risk, that he couldn't be trusted. I heard rumors that he was scrambling to save face, trying to salvage his reputation, desperately trying to keep his clients on board. It was satisfying to know he was facing the consequences of the empire he thought he had built. Meanwhile, Rachel remained clueless. She still believed her affair was a private, personal matter, that I'd just sit back and let her walk away unscathed. She had no idea I'd moved most of the company out of her reach, or that her best friend was now working alongside me. She couldn't see the walls closing in around her, the damage already being done behind the scenes. With each step of the plan, the weight of her betrayal lifted, replaced by a growing sense of control and purpose. By the time we reached the final stage, everything was in place. The assets were secured, the investors were on my side, and Yvonne's reputation had been completely shattered. Rachel and Yvonne thought they were untouchable. They believed they could live out their fantasy without consequence, that they could escape without facing the repercussions of their actions. But they had miscalculated, blinded by their own egos. The big day had finally arrived. Samantha Rithing had been carefully planned. The invitations, the agenda, the catering. On the surface, it looked like any other business meeting. Maybe a little more formal, but nothing that would raise suspicion. Rachel and Yvonne were both there, unsuspecting. They thought they were there to showcase another phase of the company's growth. I watched them interact with clients, laughing, chatting, completely oblivious to the fact that this presentation would be the beginning of the end for them. Once everyone had settled, I took the stage. Familiar faces, our investors, partners, clients, looked back at me. I began with the usual speech, talking about our values, our mission to grow with integrity, and our commitment to building lasting relationships. But then, as I spoke, my tone shifted. I saw a few people exchange glances as my words became sharper, more pointed. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the realization dawning on some of the faces in the crowd as they pieced together what was really happening. This wasn't just a regular update. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything for Rachel and Yvonne. After that public revelation, everything changed. I watched Rachel standing there, lost and defeated. She was no longer the confident person she used to be. All the self-assurance, all her control, it was all crumbling right before my eyes. She tried to say something, defend herself, but her words had no support. It was the end of her game. Her reputation was shattered. Her career was gone. Samantha Rithing she had worked so hard for was in ruins. It wasn't just her fault. It was the choice she made. As she walked out of the building, her shoulders slumped. It was as if she realized the full weight of her actions. She had lost everything. Her reputation, her career, the company, and any hope of salvaging the dream she traded me for. I watched her leave, her back hunched in defeat, looking as broken as I had felt those months ago. The weeks that followed that meeting were a whirlwind. With the public humiliation fresh in everyone's mind, the next step was clear. I filed for divorce, and with William's legal expertise, we made sure it was airtight. Samantha Rithing we'd planned. The assets shifted into my sister Millie's name. The company funds carefully moved into accounts Rachel couldn't access, made the process smooth and decisive. The divorce was swift, and Rachel couldn't do anything about it. She had no leverage. Samantha Rithing she thought she had was now out of her reach, and as much as she tried to spin her story, she had no chance. Samantha, though I'd gotten what I wanted, justice, revenge, peace, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. Rachel and I had built something together, and seeing it all fall apart, watching her unravel, was hard to reconcile with the person I used to love. But I knew I couldn't live with someone who didn't respect me or what we created. I was free now, and I could finally breathe. I threw myself back into the company, rebuilding it, and focusing on the future. And then, as I was getting used to life without Rachel, I realized I didn't want to be alone. I wasn't searching for someone, but somehow, my relationship with Samantha began to shift. Samantha, who had been Rachel's friend, had never been blind to the truth. She'd seen what Rachel was capable of, and when it all fell apart, Samantha was there. She wasn't just a friend now, she became someone I could trust. As we spent more time together, it was clear that there was something deeper between us. It wasn't something we planned, but the connection between us felt inevitable. Through everything Rachel had done, Samantha and I found a bond stronger than anything I'd had before. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was just about finding something real, something that didn't come with lies or manipulation. Rachel had no claim to anything we built. I'd safeguarded it all, down to the last dollar. She didn't even fight it, at least not publicly. By the time the papers were signed, her life was already spiraling. The affair had left her drowning in debts she and Yvonne had piled up during their little fantasy. She thought she could rely on the company's funds to cover those expenses, but with everything locked down, those costs were now her responsibility alone. William took care of every detail, ensuring that not a single asset slipped through the cracks, leaving Rachel completely stranded. After the scandal broke, people in our circle began to distance themselves from her. Samantha, once her closest friend, turned her back, realizing the depth of the betrayal. Former colleagues stopped answering her calls. She became a liability, a symbol of shame to those who had once respected her. I began hearing whispers, rumors that painted her as desperate, her reputation shattered beyond repair. No one was willing to risk their own reputation by associating with her. Meanwhile, Samantha became an anchor in my life. After everything that had happened, her loyalty felt like a breath of fresh air. Our connection deepened. It evolved into something steady and real. She stood beside me, not only as a romantic partner, but as someone I could truly trust, someone who had proven her loyalty in ways I hadn't thought possible. Samantha didn't just help me heal, she helped me rebuild. She became involved in the business, offering insights, helping me strategize, and eventually suggesting we invest together in a new venture. She had a sharp mind, and her ideas breathed new life into the work I thought I'd lost interest in. With the support of Justin and a few loyal former partners, we launched a new business. We focused on innovative financial consulting, filling market gaps that others had overlooked. The response was overwhelming. Clients who respected my ethics and business savvy flocked to us, and within months, we were gaining momentum, far exceeding anything I had ever imagined. The best part? This time, I didn't have to worry about hidden agendas or trust issues. Meanwhile, Yvonne's downfall was swift and brutal. Word spread quickly about his involvement in the scandal and his unethical practices to maintain the lifestyle he thought he deserved. As partners and investors pulled away from him, he struggled to keep afloat. He was forced to sell assets, liquidate holdings, and eventually, he faded out of the business world completely. For a man who had based his entire life on appearances, losing his standing was a fate far worse than losing money. And then there was Rachel. With her debts mounting and her reputation in tatters, she struggled to find any kind of stability. She had once been respected, seen as a powerful figure in her field, but now she was left with nothing but low-level jobs that barely covered her bills. The industry she once dominated now saw her as a liability. Any hope she had of rebuilding her career was crushed under the weight of her own choices. She had risked everything for a fleeting taste of luxury with Yvonne, and now she was paying the price, starting over from scratch, just like we had when we first began. Only this time, she had no allies left to help her. As for me, the future had never felt so open. I was free, finally unburdened by deception and betrayal. My relationship with Samantha grew stronger, evolving in ways I hadn't expected. She wasn't just my partner, she was someone who truly had my back, someone I could rely on without hesitation. Samantha Day felt like a fresh start, a new opportunity to live without the shadows of the past. Reflecting on it all, I felt lighter, as if I had shed years of weight I didn't even know I was carrying. The business was thriving, my personal life was steady, and the scars from the ordeal had transformed into strength, into clarity I hadn't had before. I'd survived betrayal, heartache, and the attempts to strip me of everything I'd built, and in the end, I had come out on top, surrounded by people I could trust,